Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm very happy to be here as usual. I love adding a boost of Etzion into my day, and you get to start your mornings that way. I'm especially happy because thank God I was given the biggest gift of life last Thursday. I gave birth to a beautiful daughter. And I have to say that, well, I never experienced birth before, and I haven't experienced it, my perspective on everything has changed, including this class. I was reviewing my notes, and all of a sudden, I feel my heart affected in a different way, because once you have children and you see about difficulties with children or parents being separated from kids or making hard decisions, then you relate to it on a whole different level. So I'm definitely going to relate to this class on a whole different level. We've been speaking about, for the past 3 weeks, about Gush Etzion, and this is the third part in the series. This is going to take a little bit of a different twist. The past few weeks, last week we spoke about one of the convoys that didn't make it to Gush Etzion, the armored vehicle. The week before we spoke a bit about the history. Today we're going to speak about some personal stories. Let me share my screen with you and you'll understand exactly. I think this is a nice way to really sum it up. Let me just wait for one person to join. Great. Okay. Yom HaShoah comes around once a year, and there are a lot of ways to commemorate Yom HaShoah. You can read a book, you can watch a movie, go to a museum, go to a ceremony. There's tons of ways. One way that people like the most, and I know it's my preferred option too, is to hear from an actual survivor, because there's something about hearing personal testimony, hearing from someone that had been there, that makes it more powerful. And I think that well, a lot of people prefer that, try to get to hear from a survivor of the Holocaust. Now, on that note, as I said in the introduction, we're going to this week talk about personal stories from people that were involved in the war of independence in Gush Etzion. What do they have to say? How do we make the stories touch home more and be less facts and more personal? So I'm going to review for anyone that needs the review. I need the review. So we opened up a few weeks ago, and we said that there were 3 attempts to settle Gush Etzion, and in the 1940s, the last one succeeded. Then we have the UN partition plan, and the Jews say, hey, we're not supposed to be according to the UN's plan, we are not in Israel anymore. What do we do in Arab territory? Do we stay? Do we leave? And they got the answer the next day when the War of Independence broke out. They said, okay, they're fighting us, let's gonna stay. And we said the Gush was really, really dangerous, and they made a very heartbreaking decision to evacuate the women and the children on January 5th, 1948. And here is a photograph of the women and children being evacuated. We mentioned last week how helping the people in the Gush, they don't have supplies, there's all Arab towns around them. And they said, okay, we'll send armored vehicles. They sent one from Yerushalayim, and 10 people were killed. That one didn't work. We said the Jews can't travel freely. They want to conquer the Gush. But how did the Jews of the Gush feel? The Jews of the Gush, they say, we're fighting for Yerushalayim because we know as long as we stand, Yerushalayim stands. And that really, really meant a lot for them. But ultimately, the Jordanians attacked, and the famous phrase, Hamakah nafla, the queen has fallen, which was the nickname of Gush Etzion, and the Gush fell. The day before, the state of Israel is declared is when this happens, and it was a huge massacre. Only 4 people remained alive. The following day, the state is declared. The war continues. Now, 19 years, no one can step foot in the Gush, and this is where we ended. No one could go in. That's it. The Jordanians are there. Now what? Until what? When were people allowed to return? And we said, if you go to Gush Etzion today, it's a hopping place. So the first question we're going to answer today is, when did people start returning to the Gush? How did the orphan children deal with what has happened? What are some of the personal stories and places to visit in Gush Etzion today? Of course, because we love visiting the places in Eretz Yisrael. So we're going to start with the third question first. What are some personal stories? So to remind us, with the women and children, there weren't a lot of supplies. Food was limited, medicine was limited, water is limited. And if there are men, women, and children, they all need to eat. So they said, well, one, on a very practical level, if we put the women and children somewhere else, then there's more food for the men. On a security level, it was very dangerous. They wanted the women and children to be safe. So now you have this difficult decision, difficult to put it lightly, that every family needs to make. Is a woman going to be separated from her husband? She knows she might never see her husband again. She's not leaving him in this nice, safe place. She's going to go now live the life of a refugee. But on the other hand, she has a motherly instinct to protect her child at all costs. So maybe she should leave and go with her child. And most of the women decided that, except for two. We're going to talk about the two that didn't. And now I want to share with you a letter from a father who now does not have his wife and child because they were separated from him. They went to Yerushalayim. Let's read a letter to get a little bit of insight into their life. So he writes the following: to my nice and cute kids, Yoshua and Ori. Mommy wrote to me that you are behaving nicely. It's too bad that your kids are so far away. The weather here is nice. The sun shines every day. There are a lot of flowers in the forest and in the courtyard, but there's nobody to pick them. All of the friends are working or standing guard and don't have free time. The swings are standing by because there's no one to swing on them. The toys and blocks are alone. All the children have left. But no matter, I know you're not to blame for it. You wanted to travel to Jerusalem and you don't have a bus you could come back in. In a few weeks, you'll be able to turn home. You know, sooner it'll be Purim. Tell mommy she should bake you hamitash and dress you up nicely and take nice pics. Send to daddy and to grandma and grandpa. And now a lot of kisses from daddy. So this is a letter that a father is writing to his woman and child in Yerushalayim. And this father's name is Yaakov Altman. And he was killed in the fighting for the Gush. We said 127 people were killed. And that's it. He never saw his family again. And now he has a wife who's a widow. And he has two children that are orphans. And they're never going to see their father again. And that this is one of many examples, because when you separate families and the father gets killed, this is what happens. So this is one example. Now, I said most of the moms went with their kids and separated from the husband, but there were two moms who chose instead to stay and help fight for the Gush. Why would they stay and leave their kids? Because they see that there's just not enough people to hold weapons. To fight back against Arabs, you need guns. If you have 50 guns, but only 30 people, it's not enough. So women saw this and said, you know what, we have an obligation to our family, to our children. However, we also need to help defend the state of Israel, and we want to stay. So most of them went. There were two that stayed. Of the two that stayed, one eventually left because to be with her child, and one did not leave and stayed till the end. The one that stayed till the end, her name was Tzipporah Rosenfeld, and she says, we left the decision until the cars came. I'm utterly confused. I'm debating between my duties as a mother and my duties as a member who needs to stand up in the face of a siege. And as I mentioned, now that I was blessed to become a mother a few days ago, I could understand what it is to have to choose how much emotion is involved, how difficult is involved. And that was her dilemma. Now, what did Tzipporah decide? She said, I'm going to stay back and I'm going to send my son Yossi, who's one, with the other women and children. Someone will take care of him. And she remains back to protect her home with her body. She saw the huge lack of holding weapons, which she mentioned, and she debated until the end, decided to stay. Here is a picture of Tzipporah, her husband Yechiel, and their 1-year-old son Yossi. Now, unfortunately, Tzipporah was killed with her husband Yechiel in the last battle of the Gush. So what does that mean for their son Yossi? Not only does he not have a father, he also doesn't have a mother. And he's growing up not knowing who his parents are. He can ask people, they tell him about them, but he never met them. He's 1 year old. He doesn't remember them. And this decision of the families to separate either one parent or both, it had an effect on their children for the rest of their lives because they're growing up without a parent or parents in this case. On the other hand, they are growing up and they're able to live in Eretz Yisrael and have a difficult life, but a life because of what their parents did for them. This is a picture of Yossi Ron, who is the son of Tzipporah and Yechiel. He is the baby you saw in the picture before that was 1 year old. And in an interview with him, he said, I grew up not knowing my parents. I don't know who they were. I couldn't feel them. And he said, but what do I take from this story? There's two messages I take. One, I know that Ahavat Haaretz, love of Eretz Yisrael, was extremely strong. They loved Eretz Yisrael. That's why they did this. And that's a value that's with me for my entire life. And he also said, Ahavat ha'am lelo gvulot, loving the nation with no limits. My parents demonstrated that to me. And then Yossi said that he had a daughter who he named Tzipporah after his mom that was unfortunately killed. And only when she was killed did he feel this new connection to his parents and understand maybe what they would have gone through. And imagine his how extra bad he feels because you have everyone else, at least they have a mom. And he's probably thinking, why couldn't my mom have come? Why did my mom have to stay back too? Every other mom came and my mother didn't. So this is an example of another person. Another story I want to share. I was back in the day when there was still tour guiding, I was a tour guide for a group 2 years ago. And the bus driver was one of the kids whose father was killed in Gush Etzion. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go speak to this bus driver. I need to ask him questions. I couldn't believe it. I was so moved to see someone that was connected to the story. I didn't end up really, I was shy. I didn't know really what to ask the bus driver, but I was very moved by it. Women fighters. You see here a photograph of the women fighting. No other war had as many women fighters. They were needed, they stepped up, and I just get so amazed by women. And a lot of times growing up, you think women don't really have such a place in Judaism, and they say, oh, women are more spiritual, and all these nice kind of things to try to placate women. And the more I learn about Eretz Yisrael, and especially now having experienced birth, I go, women are just the cream of the crop, really just on top. And these women that are raising kids, having families, and fighting, and it's just so incredible. And as time goes on, I really see a woman's place in Am Yisrael, how amazing it is, and how much they contribute, and how much they do. I think it's just about learning the right things and having the right experiences. But once you're open to it, I'm just blown away. And we're mostly women on this class except for one person. So. And I'm sure that one person would agree also. So the women, they took an active role by defending it and having children, which is very different than the image of the woman who's in the kitchen cooking. No, the women of Gush Etzion were a lot more than that. Here is a picture of two boys, Yitzchak and Chaim Levinovich. And they are another example of people who only had a mom growing up because their father was killed. And what they say in an interview was, we feel like of course they feel like something was missing, but something that was missing was we never even properly parted from our parent. Usually you're about to say goodbye, you're not going to see someone for a long time, you give them a big hug and a kiss, you part, and they never parted. And they said this is something that's really lacking and really missing. So that's something that they shared. Here's a picture of the children that are now growing up with one parent. They're in Yerushalayim, that they were separated, as we said. Another story I want to talk about. What about the people that don't have any family? This woman, Chaya Lena Versatile, she was a Holocaust survivor, as many of the people building the Gush were. She came to Eretz Yisrael, and she writes that if anyone ever sent her a letter, she got so excited because she had no family, she had no one. She went through 3 concentration camps. She comes to Israel, she's deported because at that time the British weren't letting people in. Eventually she comes back, and she was one of the people killed as well. Now, she has no one to remember her because she doesn't have a child. She wasn't married yet. She has us to remember her. And this is a phenomenon of a lot of people. It's called in Hebrew the Netzer HaAcharon, like the last surviving member of their family. And actually in Har Herzl, they have this special memorial for people such as her that have no one. They're killed, that's it. Their chain is cut off. And she was also someone that was killed in the Gush fighting. I want to add something else. If anyone of you has ever been to Alon Shvu, you'll see this oak tree. This is a very famous oak tree known in Hebrew as Alon HaBoded, or the lone oak. Why? Everyone is kicked out of the Gush. That's it. The war is over and the Jordanians are in charge. Now, the children that started their lives there, they want to be able to see where they grew up. So they go to the mountaintop and they look and they say, oh, they're over there, far away where that oak tree is. That is where our homes were. that is where our families died defending our homeland, and that they're able to see. Now, the oak tree today is not really so known anymore because thank God Eretz Yisrael is blooming and there's tons of houses and factories and things all around. But this was the symbol of Gush Etzion for 19 years, when that's all they could point at. Also happened to be when convoys would come and unload, they would unload there. This tree, so if you go and visit it, I want to give you a tip that it's one thing to see a tree from far. It's another thing, especially this tree, to go under its leaves. And when I was with my course and we were visiting, our tour guide said, what, you're just going to look at the tree? Come under the tree, come experience it. And as you see now, there's support beams because the tree is about 700 years old and it's such a symbol, they don't want it to fall. But you come to this tree and you talk about the story of Gush Etzion and what it meant, that the people are looking, it's like, oh, that's where we used to live, but we can't go there anymore. And who are these people? These are people that know how much their parents love them and that the difficult decision to separate. And there's so many values and emotion in the story of Gush Etzion. It's really, really something. So this was a really big symbol. And Gush Etzion today, so Gush means a conglomeration. It's a mix of a few different yeshuvim. Their symbol is this tree. So if you see the tree, you know why. Also, Alon Shvut, as I mentioned, chose the tree. Shvut is to return. Alon is oak. So it's symbolizing, Alon Shvut is the yeshuv that was built later on, that the people are returning. Also, a very nice thing, we mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago that the whole area of Gush Etzion is an area that's very appropriate to study when you're studying Sefer Bereshit, because the Avot and Imahot, this is where they were. They're going from Yerushalayim to Hebron, Me'arat HaMachpelah, Yaakov stops in Migdal Eder. This is where the story is happening. And a cute thing is when they named it Alon Shvut, the weight of the word is like Alon Bachut. Alon Bachut, to remind us when Yaakov was on his way back to Eretz Yisrael, Rivka's Meneket Devorah, she died, and he buried her under the tree, and he called the place Alon Bachut. So in order to keep the same weight of the word, they named it Alon Shvut. So that's just a nice thing to add in. So I don't know if we discussed already. Okay. Now, this last story I want to share is so moving, having to do with returning to the Gush. 1967, the Six-Day War, miraculous victory, and in this neon green is all the land that is conquered. What does it mean that all this land is conquered? So if we zoom in, this area over here is the area of Gush Etzion, which means finally we could return home because we conquered it again in the war. And the Jewish people finally can return after 19 years. They don't need to just point anymore and say, oh, that's the tree where we used to live. They could actually go. And it was one of the first places settled after the Jews could come back. And it's just it's meaningful on so many levels, but especially this. On the way, if we look at this map, we have Yerushalayim up in the north, Kever Rachel and Bet Lechem, and Gush Etzion down south. And the people that are going to Gush Etzion to now resettle it, and who are the people? It's the children. They grew up there until they were about 1 year old. They stop by Kever Rachel. And what do? They open up Sefer Yirmiyahu and they start reading. And it says in Sefer Yirmiyahu, Ko amar Adonai, Ko beraman ishma bechi tamrurim, Rachel mevaka'a baneha. Rachel is crying about her children. Me'ana lehinachem, she can't be comforted. And what does God tell her? Ko amar Adonai, Min'i kolech mitbechi ve'enayich midva, ki yesh sachad lefulatech, v'shavu me'eretz oyev, v'shavu banim legvulam. Hashem tells her, stop crying, your children are going to return home. And now these families, these children, they go to Kever Rachel, they open up Yirmiyahu and they say, Rachel, look, we're coming home. For 19 years, we couldn't go home. And now we're passing by your kever on our way to Gush Etzion. And the fact that they, one, choose to stop there, choose to open the Tanakh and read it, it shows how connected they were. And that the Tanakh is something that's part of their life. It's something that they see coming true. It's something that they want to share with Rachel and show her, look, it's really coming true. So something I just thought of now to share. As I mentioned, like, thank God I gave birth on Thursday, and my whole perspective on life, on God, on everything changed completely. Something people often want to do is add more meaning to their tefillah. And I telling my friends that the number one way to add meaning to your tefillot is to give birth, because you give birth and it's just so incredible and amazing. And I stopped having time really to formally pray. I never understood, like, what do you mean? Why is mom so busy? She doesn't have time to sit and pray. I mean, that all of a sudden I'm not. But every single pasuk makes me cry. I don't stop crying because everything, I'm like, wow, this is talking about birth. And I'm just so moved by everything. And I said, this is a totally different level. And one of my friends said she wishes her tefillot and Yom Kippur could come close to what they were when she gave birth. Maybe I should have given this class on my experiences giving birth, because I'm just so, I don't stop crying from excitement. Today I was in the doctor and they said, if you cry a lot, it could be signs of postpartum depression, just be aware. And I thought to myself, yeah, I cry a lot from excitement, from love of God. Anyway, all of this is to bring up which point that when I was giving birth, so it was a very, very long labor. From my first contraction until I gave birth was 38 hours, very long. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there waiting to open up more. So my husband says, I'm going to pray shacharit. I go, what do you mean shacharit? It's the middle of the night. And all of a sudden it was day. And then time is passing by. And then I look and it's 3:00 and I go, oh my goodness, I didn't pray today. Never in my life did I forget to pray. How could I just forget? I can't believe I didn't pray. And then I said, what do you mean I didn't pray? I'm having the most spiritual day in my entire life. All I'm doing is speaking to God. This is really what tefillah is. And this is what I'm experiencing now as I'm not using the siddur anymore and I'm doing my own tefillah. I said, wow, if I cry from reading a pasuk, Mina Metzar Karatiya Anani B'Merchavia, that God saved me from my CD and from my contractions and opened me up. If that brings me to tears, how could you get higher than that? I could read every line there is in the siddur. It doesn't even compare. And I'm just so overwhelmed by it and still processing. And I think the more, going back to Gush Etzion, the more connected a person is to, of course, the Pesukim and the Tanakh. Then when they have experiences in their life, they're able to connect to it and be elevated on such a higher level. Oh my gosh, I forgot the point. Okay, here's the point of why I told this whole story. Now I just remembered. I forgot to pray. Then I said, oh, okay, I'll squeeze in Mincha. So I start reading Mincha formally from the Siddur. And then I get to the line where it's talking about Magen Avot. I can't even remember the lines anymore, but Zocher Chastei Avot. And then I start crying. Why? I said, look at me. I'm sitting in a room. I'm about to continue what God told the Avot. God told the Avot that he's going to give them a lot of children in Eretz Yisrael. And look at me right now. I'm living in Eretz Yisrael, about to give Am Yisrael another child. I'm showing God, I'm showing the Avot, look, the promise came true. And that's what I thought of as I was sitting there in labor. And that was triggered by this, how the people of Gush Etzion did not forget to go back to Kever Rachel and say, Rachel, look, God is remembering his promise. So they stopped by there on the way. And okay, this I mentioned. And whoever was born in the Gush as a child 20 years before is now returning. And I want to mention to you, if you remember Shalom Kadmiel, when we spoke about the founding of the Gush, he was talking about how they're planting fruit trees and they feel so connected, and the tree is reaching upwards towards the sky, towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but they're firmly rooted on the ground. And he was killed in one of the convoys of the time. But what happens? 19 years later, when they come back, his son named Shimon returns. And Shimon returns, gets married, and has a son named Shalom. Shalom Karniel. Shalom Karniel was killed here, but Shalom Karniel still lives on this hilltop. And it's really a full circle. So beautiful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to set it up. And this is a beautiful story that happens. We asked 3 weeks ago, our opening question was, what were the 4 attempts to settle the Gush? And we said Migdal Eded failed because of Arab riots. Kibbutz Kfar Etzion failed because of riots. Third one now failed because of the war. And the fourth one, V'shavu banim legvulam, thank God, is doing amazing and thriving. This is Gush Etzion today, which has thousands of Jews living in it. From 1967 and on, it was really built up, succeeded. And what is there to do in the Gush today? So other than learn this amazing story over and over and over and focus on any one of the elements, and I gave you a ton to focus on between all of the weeks, there are also more practical activities. You could take your children. And I think it's so great. Take your children, do something fun there. But of course, mention the story so they could connect on an even higher level. So this we mentioned last week, there's a visitor center, which the entire story I told you, they tell with a really good movie. Now they recommend the ages should be 9 and up or maybe 12 and up. Really, really listen to the age because it's a very scary movie. We're talking about a war and a lot goes over the kid's head, but it's scary. So really listen to the age is my recommendation. Another really fun thing to do there is to go ATVing, and you go among the vineyards. And then when you go among the vineyards, you talk about Yehuda because Yehuda was blessed to have grapes, and it's Nachalat Yehuda. There's so much to talk about. I miss my job. Restaurants, amazing food. You can have the best day there. Parks, you can play in Eretz Yisrael freely. Side note, when I took my daughter to the doctor today, so I walked there, it was beautiful out 10 minutes. I stepped foot outside the house and I start crying. So, wow, I'm taking my daughter for her first walk outside in Eretz Yisrael. And I said, everything makes me cry. It's just that I'm bringing the Nevuah coming alive, and I really feel it with every single step that I take in this country. And of course, you can go and visit the Lone Oak. You could even do this in 2 days. It's so packed. There's so much to do there. Okay. So the Gush Etzion Gush junction is 18 different yeshuvim under them. It really grew. Amazing how many more people there are. And just to summarize what we spoke about. So we opened up and said, on Yom HaShoah, we like hearing from Holocaust survivors because we like the personal account. So why not do that too? We learned the story of the Gush. Why not hear personal stories? And we opened up with Yaakov Altman, who was a father, wrote a letter to his cute kids that he was separated from. Fortunately, he was killed, never saw them again. Tzipporah Rosenfeld, the mom, the only mom, who made the heartbreaking decision to send her son off without her, and she would stay and fight for the Gush. Unfortunately, she was killed. Yossi Ron grows up not knowing any of his parents, but knowing very deeply the values that they stood for. We said how many women fought. They fought with their bodies, they fought with their souls to help defend Eretz Yisrael. The two brothers who said, it's so missing to us. We never got to separate from our dad. We don't know who our parent is. Lena Tawil, who was a Holocaust survivor, she was killed. That's it. Chain cut, no one else. The Lone Oak, which was the symbol, this is where we used to live. And eventually, the Chasdei Hashem after 1967, being able to return to Gush Etzion, and instead of just pointing at the oak, building houses around the oak tree. Shalom Kardiel, who was killed in one of the convoys, now he has a grandson with the same name who is growing up there. Before attempts to settle, he said, fail. But eventually, we have one that succeeded, and the Gush today is a thriving, amazing place with tons of really fun activities to do. Thank you so much for joining this long series. Next week, completely different topic. I look forward to seeing you all there. Have a wonderful day.